Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election from a well-oiled machine headed by John
welcome to the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. Another exciting episode 14. So much to talk about. Today, today is Saturday, February 16th, already halfway past the month. My name is Jason Miko. I am coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Chilimanov. I'm calling in from Skopje, Macedonia.
All right. Good to be with you again, Cvetin. We had a little bit of a delay due to some technical issues on my end with my computer and whatnot. But I think before we go any further, we just want to bring up the recent bus crash in Macedonia and offer up our prayers and thoughts for the souls of the deceased, for the families and for their friends. We're praying for the survivors, that they would be healed, and of course for the first responders and the hospital workers and the doctors and the nurses, and just a horrible tragic accident.
Yeah, the death toll just went up to 15 this morning. There are a few more which are critical, and there were family men, people with children, mothers and fathers. There were a few grandmothers, grandfathers who were visiting their grandchildren in Skopje. There were students. It was really a horrific thing.
Yeah, and Macedonia, it's faced so many tragedies, and we could name them. We could just sit here and spend the next hour naming all of the tragedies that have befallen Macedonia, and yet the Macedonians are strong and resilient. The Macedonian spirit continues. And Macedonians don't just survive, but they thrive. And this is something I've been saying for the nearly 24 years I've been in Macedonia. I want to see Macedonians thrive, not just survive. And this is a very difficult time for Macedonia with this so-called name change that the government has instituted against the will of the people of Macedonia, against the Macedonians. And so now the government, I think the government's in a race with itself to see who can change more websites and social media handles and social media pages and signs and plaques before the other ministry. It's almost comedic.
Yeah, well, we can count on them being both lazy and incompetent in this, and this is one instance where I actually want them to be incompetent. If you've seen they changed the most visible elements. It's the boards when you enter Macedonia from a foreign country, especially Greece. The government put in. Everybody assumed they're going to put in new boards, which are going to say, going to use this new imposed name, Republic of North Macedonia. But actually, they didn't even bother to print a new board. They just printed out
vinyl sticker. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, adhesive sticker. So it's going to be easy to stick on and stick off for future reference.
Well, that, and of course, as we've been talking about, paint sales should be increasing. I don't know what the availability of shotguns is in the Republic of Macedonia. Here in the United States of America, we like to use shotguns on road signs.
Difficult. We're a former totalitarian country. For me to just purchase my own shotgun, it actually included, listeners in the States might be interested in this. It actually includes a visit not by the regular police, but by the secret police. So they're looking into your background on a secret police level, the equivalent, I guess, of the NSA level in the U.S. Just for a 12 gauge and nothing more. A long barrel, not even you can't get a sawed-off shotgun. So it's extremely, it's one of the marks of a totalitarian country here. So there's not much culture in shooting at signs. There's actually more culture of shooting signs with machine guns, because especially in the Albanian rural parts of the country,
The Kalashnikov.
yeah, they have AK-47s everywhere. So it's actually easier to get an AK-47 than if you're going illegally than if you're going to the legal route to buy a shotgun.
Most popular machine gun on planet Earth is the AK-47, the Kalashnikov. Which reminds me, the total aside here, another one of my many projects that I want to see done in Macedonia is bringing the National Rifle Association to Macedonia, or if they can't actually establish a chapter there, then Friends of the National Rifle Association in Macedonia. But let's say we're talking about signs. We're talking about how the government is in a race with itself to change everything. There is one holdout. God bless him, President Georgi Ivanov of the Republic of Macedonia. He is refusing to change his website. It still says President of the Republic of Macedonia. And according to the so-called Prespa agreement, it should have been changed a day or two ago. And this is going to be an interesting fight.
I mean, obviously, he was never going to do this. He was opposed to the name change. He was opposed to the entire procedure that was going on. They tried to break him by threatening Ivanov with criminal charges against people close to him. And then ultimately the entire Bondugal was pushed through parliament without his signature, which makes it very illegal and which might be useful in future, depending on how able we would be to reverse this thing. And for the other government institutions, they are largely changing the names, but it's going to take an enormous amount of time. We're not going to give anybody any ideas, but we were just talking about this with Jason. We were checking up some websites or pages online, which the use of the name was so entrenched over the decades, and the problem with the Greeks was that they were not using the name Macedonia for their state. So basically, they were not countering proactively. They would tell us don't use the name, but they were not using it themselves. So if you just Google Macedonia for literally anything, there are so many articles active and ongoing websites that it's. I was just teasing some a Zaev supporter online who supports everything that's going on, but he still uses Macedonian Republic of Macedonia in a bunch of things he's doing. So it's impossible. It's undoable, honestly. We can just slap on something temporarily, but it's not going to stick.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned that Greece never did use Macedonia until Macedonia declared independence in 1991, and then of course they renamed their northern province. But on Twitter, it's been fascinating because before June, when the so-called Prespa agreement was signed, the Greeks were largely absent from the hashtag Macedonia thread, and since then they've been pretty active on it. My prediction is that after all this hubbubaloo, I can't even say that. It's too early in the morning here. Dies down. After the brouhaha dies down, the Greek trolls will stop using it. They'll lose interest. They'll go back to, whatever it is they do. They'll go back to taunting the Turks. But still on the Twitter thing, this is fascinating just from a sociological standpoint. I think I call it the ghettoization of Twitter. A case in point being Macedonia. It'll be interesting to see who uses hashtag North Macedonia and who uses. I know who's going to use hashtag Macedonia. It'll be interesting to see the think tanks, the academics, the elected officials, the unelected bureaucrats, media organizations, etc. If they use it at all, will they use hashtag North Macedonia or North hashtag Macedonia? Anyway, just again, from a purely sociological standpoint, it's going to be fascinating to watch what happens. But that leads me to my next point I think we should talk about, and that is the creeping use of the term North Macedonian to describe the Macedonians. And we're seeing this pop up. I don't know if it's going to take hold or not. I think it's too early, but we are seeing it pop up here and there. And I don't know what you're seeing, and you're following several different languages besides the English language. What do you hear over there?
Well, I mean, we discussed this, that the German version will be the worst for us because it's North Macedonian. But otherwise, I don't really see anybody coming up with a adjective North Macedonian for the people. They will definitely use it for the state, for government, for state institutions. internationally, but I doubt anybody would say North Macedonian for the language or the people. But I see people trying to actively avoid using the adjective. Even some suck-ups like my former colleagues in the MIA, the state news agency of Macedonia, they're trying. One of those who want to show themselves to be bigger Catholics than the Pope, as we would say here. They're actively avoiding using the word Macedonian. They just off North Macedonia. Everything is now off. Belongs to North Macedonia, comes from North Macedonia. Obviously, I'm going to continue using hashtag Macedonia for everything, and Macedonian, we're just going to ignore.
Right. Yes, they do, and I know the Greeks, and I got a couple of examples here. The Greeks, and we know that the Greeks are going to try and force the world to say North Macedonian because they tried to get the world to say Fyromian or Scopian or something other than Macedonian prior to this. And so they're going to try it. It's going to be a battle of wills. I see here, so the former foreign minister, Dora Bakoyana, says, let's see, what she said, I will not call its prime minister, quote, Macedonian. I will call Zaev or the next prime minister, the prime minister of North Macedonia, quote unquote. Tom Ellis, who is the editor of the English language version of the Greek daily Katamarini, says common sense dictates that they be called, quote, North Macedonians, unquote. So, and I think we can just go through all of the Greek examples. We know that that's what they're going to do. They're going to push that to try and get folks to say North Macedonian. But to your point about your former colleagues at MIA trying to avoid saying Macedonian, is what that's all about. And we saw it prior to Prespa, and it's just going to continue, meaning nothing's been solved.
Yeah, we're going to have this fight. Hopefully, as Nikola Gruevski said in one of his several interviews over the past week, under more favorable terms to us. From inside these institutions, but ideally we would never have done any of this, and we would have remained the Republic of Macedonia, and we would have fought to defend this position, not try to recapture the hill once we lost it. Although, even though we might be theoretically, a NATO member of some stature in a short while, and maybe begin some sort of EU accession talks, which might last forever. But this is it's not resolved. On one hand, the Greeks, I imagine they will get lazy as well. They're not the most efficient and dedicated people. It was easy for them to block this issue, but they're not going to pick up and use the flag and the mantle of Macedonia because they don't feel like Macedonians. They feel like Greeks. This is a huge part of the problem we're having with them because they're not using it, but they don't want to let us use it. On the other hand, so I don't see them actively campaigning to get a hold of the name and the adjective because they are not accustomed to using it. It means very little to them. It was imposed on them recently, as you said, when Macedonia was beginning to declare its independence, and extreme nationalism was the response in Greece. So we'll have this fight. In the institutions. So far, Zaev is right now in Munich. He's being lauded by Angela Merkel and the likes of her. And
he went to pick up his 30 pieces of silver, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I imagine it was much more. There was talk of a mole in Switzerland, and his people are taking over some companies about which the SDSM people and US aid-funded media here were protesting and saying, this company is run by the Gruevski regime, they're horrible, that's horrible, this is corruption of the highest order. And now Zaev's people are taking over the same companies. Literally yesterday it happened that his security chief is replacing people associated with Sasha Mialkov, Gruevski's security chief and cousin, in a large Bitola company. So, this is this is becoming like a feudal property of Zaev, much in the way in which Zaev and the US government and US aid were previously objecting that Gruevski is acting, even though you cannot compare the two, because under Gruevski, as everybody is now mentioning at this convention going on right now in Struga, the Vemera convention, we were opening up a new factory every month, which were major international companies which you cannot blackmail or force. Gruevski was laughing in the interviews. So what you're saying that I got this company from the United States to relocate here, and then they came here because they liked being blackmailed by me, or that I was racketeering them. It's preposterous. But we are actually having this type of developments right now. What they were claiming they're fighting against, it's actually happening under the SDSM rule, and nobody bats an eye. Things are going on as usual. But this will last so long as these governments are in office. The Greek government should be out in half a year at the most, and afterwards we have
probably by May.
Yeah, we have the conservatives taking over. The backlash is going to happen in Macedonia as well. Zaev refused to allow holding early general elections, so in April and early May we vote for a new president. So we see whether the backlash begins here or at the next general elections, which should also come.
Well, 4 years would be December of 16, so that'd be December of 2020.
Yeah, but everybody
if we went,
it's going to be sooner than
if
that.
we went 4 years. Yeah. No, it'll be before that. Well, you just brought up a couple of points, and again, we've got so much to talk about that I want to tackle kind of looking at what's going on in Macedonia with both the Anti-Corruption Commission and this rumor that Citizen and Dewey want to abolish the Special Prosecutor's Office, because now actually there's we know that the Special Prosecutor's Office has had, for instance, Buyar Osmani in their sights for some time, but it's all been downplayed. But the Anti-Corruption Commission, I saw a news item the other day where the Anti-Corruption Commission is going to be investigating Citizen or Dewey or itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, one of the best moments is that the brother-in-law of the Dewey-appointed Speaker of Parliament, unlawfully appointed Speaker of Parliament, Talat Jaferi, is now a member of the Anti-Corruption Commission, and he will be investigating Talat Jaferi's daughter. So he's her uncle. Because she was hired in a government-run institution, and she's just one of the dozens of people who were hired by government institutions. These are close relatives of government officials. So the Minister for the Economy hired his sister in a government-run company. The several SDSM members of parliament hired their brothers, sisters, whatever, in public institutions. And the best of these is obviously an SDSM member of parliament who comes from Delchova, which is at the furthest eastern part.
Oh yeah, right on the border.
Yeah, of the country. And she collected 12,000 euros for travel expenses to Skopje and back from the parliament, which is almost, you can rent 6 or 7 apartments in Skopje with that type of money. You do not have to travel all the time. Then her name is Mira, and she's now nicknamed Mira Diesel because of this. and then she applied for heating subsidies in Delchova, even though, judging by her travels to Skopje, she's spending more time in her car than in Delchova if you take her expenses at face value. But then her husband also applied, and a couple of relatives also applied, and they all live in the same house or adjacent. So they're collecting several separate subsidies for heating one same house. And then eventually she had her son hired in a government company, her brother, and now her husband.
Wow.
So this is the type of things we're dealing with here. And it's become a big issue, honestly. Almost as big as the name change.
Yeah, well, you've got the rapidly increasing deluge of information on corruption within Citizen Dewey. Everybody's known this for as long as as long as these parties have existed. So you've got that. You've got the fact that Macedonia is creeping towards NATO membership, although could be the end of the year and whatnot. Zaev continues to insist that this is going to bring in all kinds of huge amounts of foreign investment, but that's not true because, as we talked about in the last podcast, the one before that, foreign investors look at more than just the fact that you are or are about to become a member of NATO. They look at things like levels of corruption, crime and violence. And frankly, that's something we haven't even talked about. I know that in the past couple of weeks, there have been a number of incidents in Macedonia of actual criminal activity with guns and RPGs, I believe. Fortunately, I don't think anybody's been hurt, but in all of my years of living in and working with Macedonia, aside from 2001 and Kumanovo and things like that, which were, designed to split the country in half, crime with guns, that belongs to our Bulgarian friends. They're notorious for killing their oligarchs and then never solving issues. At least we don't have that level of criminality, wanton criminality in Macedonia yet. And hopefully we never do. But going back to what I was talking about, foreign direct investment, investors look at that stuff. Besides the corruption, they look at the criminality and a whole bunch of other factors. So Zaev isn't going to be getting the 300 million euros that he thinks are going to come in addition to everything else, just from NATO membership. And the people are going to see that. They're going to see the corruption. They're going to see the fact that living standards aren't going up. And they're going to look at, and then we've said nothing about EU enlargement yet. And that comes up, I think, in May or June? Well, after it must be June, after the EU elections, whether or not France and the Netherlands and others are going to say no again to Macedonia and Albania. So he's not going to get the boost that he's hoping for from having gone through this entire process of changing Macedonia's name, constitution, identity, culture, heritage, language, everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was talking about, he announced he'll bring Volkswagen in Macedonia to open a major new company, but he also mentioned Google and Facebook coming into the country. Nobody's taking this stuff at face value.
Maybe Amazon, since Amazon is not going to have their those 25,000 jobs in New York City, maybe he can bring them over to Macedonia.
We're available. We can do it. It's not even. I mean, nobody's. I've yet to find somebody who takes these things seriously or at face value. One of his business promoters he hired to replace the really excellent, oftentimes American Macedonian business promoters, which Gruevski brought here, duped somehow to come into this godforsaken hellhole from the United States and try to bring some companies here. So one of the guys, Zaev, he became famous by posting on Facebook that he's offering jobs for people in Germany, like painters and drywall installers. So, not even his business promoters are taking seriously the chances that they're going to open some businesses in here. They've largely kicked out some investors, just like Ocasio-Cortez did to Amazon. They stopped a major copper mine which was supposed to be built. And then Zaev was booed on the stage like a few days ago when he visited a village in his neighborhood around Strumica, which is also a huge copper mine negotiated by Gruevski, was supposed to be built there. And all these leftists, which Zaev funded and USAID funded, to protest against Gruevski, accusing him of deliberately trying to poison the villagers of the most fertile valley in the country with cyanide, no matter that all the villagers have moved on to Italy because they have no jobs. So they were trying to block this deal, which was like $500 million. It was like a huge amount of money in investments. We barely have that much in infrastructure, which the government is borrowing to build, ongoing. And this was a private company which was going to pour this money privately into a copper mine. So Zaev's lefty and green protesters tried to stop this. Once Zaev formed the government, we were all chuckling because we knew that the days come that he's going to have to go against his crazy greens, because he would definitely be interested in a different type of green after he's prime minister. But now he has to go there and he meets the villagers and he's booed on stage. So he's also at the same time trying to literally, in this case, actually trying to racketeer these businesses, because he organized protests, tried to kick them out of the country. Now he wants to keep them here after presumably having come to some sort of an arrangement with these investors. But he was booed on stage by the people. I'm not sure whether they were booing him because they wanted the jobs or because they think he will now really skirt environmental regulations, knowing him. He's not the most trustworthy person, unlike Gruevski.
You don't say.
But either way, he's putting himself in a position that things are going to be go badly for him personally, and especially, I'm not going to even discuss the business prospects, the economic prospects of the country under him. It's ridiculous.
So would you say then that he is preparing himself, kind of like our old friend Bronco Cervenkovsky prepared himself for the eventual day when he knew he wouldn't be in power, but he basically raped the country so that he could have all this money to see him through to his old age? That's what Bronco did, and that sounds like that's what Zaev is attempting to do.
Well, it's presumed he already has enough to flee the country, unless, I'm not sure if it's enough for actively fighting extradition charges or, if things go sour against him, how much he could count on the protection of the people who brought him into power, these U.S. diplomats and European Union diplomats. To what extent will they be able to protect him once he eventually has to leave the country? He has a long record of corruption and crimes behind him, so it would, and now he's actively adding to this, like in this case which I mentioned, about hostile takeover of a company which he himself declared to be corrupt and connected with the government, but he now does not want to investigate this. He does not want to get to the bottom of the thing. He wants to take over the company with his own people, which is, I don't see this ending well.
It's going to be interesting. So we know that Zaev and Tsipras have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which of course has become a joke in and of itself after they nominated Barack Obama, who then went on to bomb several countries. But that's another subject. They've nominated him, and look, it's going to take time. Several years down the road, I don't know if it's several years, 5 years, 10 years, at some point, all of his crimes are going to be exposed, and it's going to be more egg on the face of the so-called Nobel Peace Committee. Which a slight diversion here. I just want to, and this is an attribute of our society today in Western civilization, is that it's the immediacy of everything, and we've become a culture that paces in front of the microwave because it doesn't work fast enough. And so we're looking at all of these events and, just taking how the praise has been heaped upon Zaev for achieving, quote, peace and reconciliation, unquote, when the facts, the so-called Prespa agreement is still warm. It's not even cold. And we don't know what's going to happen down the road. And yet all of these idiots are trying to heap praise. They're trying to beat each other to the punch on Twitter and other social media platforms to praise Zaev and Tsipras so that they can be seen as acknowledging this and praising them, when you and I and most thinking people know full well this thing isn't going to work.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I can understand that they've been starved for good news for their team after, losing Turkey, the thing that's happening in Ukraine, relations with Russia, all sorts of elections throughout Europe from Italy and Hungary and Poland and elsewhere, barely, narrowly avoiding disaster in France, and only to have the latest protests and Brexit and then Trump. But it's ridiculous to say that, well, okay, but we won in Macedonia. Like, okay, great, good work, guys. You chalk one up for the team. Like our U.S. ambassador, he was in Turkey during the coup against Erdogan, and what's been happening afterwards. Everybody in Turkey considers the United States as being behind the Gezi protests, which led to the coup. So, you lose out in an 80 million country, a huge NATO member, second NATO military after the US. But then you come to Macedonia and there you score a win.
Right.
Like, Jesus.
Well, actually, yeah, and that's Jesse. Jesse's actually retiring next month. He's not just leaving Macedonia, but he's retiring from the Foreign Service completely, even though I think he's eligible. He's young enough to he could go on to another position if he wanted it, but I don't think A, he doesn't want it, or B, the State Department doesn't want him to have another position because of his record.
Yeah, retiring from the U.S. Embassy in Macedonia have become really an epidemic here. His political officer, David Stevenson, he retired from the State Department, and he's much younger than him, after twisting arms and blackmailing people and pushing us along this way. And now, as soon as he retired, he opened up a company with Zaev's lawyer, Filip Medarsky.
Oh my goodness.
Which, no Macedonian can take the U.S. seriously as an honest broker ever again. I mean, this is an epic disaster. Even now we have allegations, the Interior Ministry is saying yesterday that they scooped up 20 ISIS terrorists who were allegedly planning attacks in Macedonia, and the U.S. embassy comes out and says, yes, we're warning American citizens about this, which is a routine warning they're going to give. And everybody on social media is like, oh, right, yes, here we go again. They're doing it again. Because they've seen the U.S. diplomats here lying that they care about the rule of law, that they care about, which company is run by a political party or who is appointed somewhere, or which media outlet is close to, if a media outlet is fair and balanced enough. They were actually campaigning on these things, both the U.S. diplomats here and the media outlets they fund and the politicians close to them. And then once the name change is done, they don't care about how we got there. They don't care about who owns these companies. They don't care about changes in editorial policies of media outlets. They don't care about political prisoners, nothing. And then nobody believes them. And even if there actually is an honest-to-God ISIS cell operating here, and even if there was the most honest intentions on everybody involved, Zaev's interior minister and Jess Bailey's team there, nobody believes them. Whatever happens, it's going to be another conspiracy theory, another ruse, another trick. Zaev's advisor until recently, Ruben Zeman, now member of parliament from SDSM, was on Facebook saying that Russian agents literally cut the lines of the bus, which crashed with 15 dead, because things were going so well for Macedonia. He said a foreign intelligence service and the on-call anti-NATO commentators, they were conspiring to make this happen.
What?
And then the next day they say, oh, we actually caught some ISIS people. How can I believe you now? You're peddling deranged conspiracy theories one day, and the next day you actually have, you're the shepherd who cried wolf. Now you actually have a problem. Nobody's going to believe you.
Yeah, again, this is something that we've continued to talk about, continue to write about, and we will continue in as long as the West exists. The concept of democracy and the institutions of democracy, the reputations of the European Union, NATO, the United States have all been severely damaged because of this process over the past 3 years, and because of the support of the EU, the West, and the US and NATO for the way that this whole thing has happened. I don't know if that's. I think it's irreparable damage. I don't know if it can be repaired or not.
No, it's finished.
Well, a minute ago, and I'm just checking the time here and whatnot, and I'm actually going on a hike in these mountains I always talk about later on this morning. So we mentioned the presidential race briefly. It is today, again, is Saturday, February 16. By the time we actually get this thing in the can and out to our tens of listeners, the VMRO will have chosen its presidential candidate, because you mentioned they're meeting in Struga?
Yes, the convention is there.
It's tonight.
Yes, it's ongoing. They made their speeches. The leading candidates are Vlatko Đurčev and Gordana Siljanovska, and both are critics and opponents of the Prespa deal. Both, they approach it differently. On one hand, Siljanovska is approaching it from a legalistic point of view. She wrote this extensive analysis on where it goes wrong, and it really is. It goes wrong in a lot of places, in a lot of issues. And then Đurčev is a more practical practitioner. He went to DC for the prayer breakfast. He met their conservative commentators like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. He met Mike Pompeo and people from the Trump team. So his pitch is that he would be a different type of practitioner of politics should he be elected. But a lot of damage has been done, and people are really angry, and all of this would take time to repair, and it's uncertain whether people have patience to wait for this to be repaired.
Well, this goes back to, you mentioned that Vlatko was at the prayer breakfast recently, meeting with conservative personalities, Mike Pompeo, et cetera. And, I think it's important to bring up a point, especially to our friends in the Boycottiram movement. And we were both Boycottiram. But there are some folks that say, well, he shouldn't be having those relationships because these people, Mike Pompeo, et cetera, force this name change. And that's true. But you got to be honest. Look, you have to have these relationships, even with these people that did this evil to Macedonia. You've got to have these relationships. Mike Pompeo is the Secretary of State of the United States of America. It's important to have these relationships to tell your side of the story, even though. And look, Mike Pompeo doesn't even know where Macedonia is. He doesn't know the intricacies of the whole thing. He didn't read the Prespa agreement. He doesn't know any of this stuff. So it's important to get this information out to him and to people under him, if not for now, then for the future. And so I know Vlatko's been criticized for that, but those are absolutely necessary relationships. He's right on that. It's interesting that we're talking about this now because in about 10 days, we remember the 15th anniversary of the death of President Boriss Relationships, Macedonia's second president, and 8 of his colleagues on that in that tragic crash over Bosnia-Herzegovina. And Boriss was very much in that mold. He had these excellent relationships with elected leaders and others in the United States and the European Union and around the world. I mean, I remember he spent 3 hours with Vladimir Putin in Moscow talking about who knows what. I mean, I actually know some of the things they talked about, but I'm still sworn to secrecy on that. But these relationships are important. And so, we've got to maintain those. I don't know about the other candidate, what her relationships are with foreigners and whatnot. And I know that she was formerly citizen, I believe. But anyway, all that to say, by the time this thing is in the can and out to the publics, we'll know who the VMRO candidate is. The citizen candidate will be chosen, I think, in early March. And then we're off to the races.
Yeah, there is visible divisions in SDSM between the different camps. They have like 3 distinct camps: the rural camp around Zaev and Oliver Spasovsky, the Skopje urban elite camp, which is Shekerinska and the old people who really, even openly to his face, look down on Zaev. There were some hilarious interviews about him in the past when they would tell him that they consider him to be a selak, which is a very pejorative word we use for a peasant, a villager. And then there is the new third plank of their tripod, the Albanian voters around Muhammad Zakiri, and drummed up by the U.S. Embassy here. So there is going to be infighting over this. There is clearly going to be an issue over who gets to be the president and in which way the losing camps will be compensated by the winning camp. One way to do this is early elections. Some in the Skopje wing of SDSM are actually actively demanding early elections, hoping that even if they win even less votes than before, but they could, due to public outrage at them, but they would be able to negotiate a better deal to reduce the number of Zaev's rural members of parliament and get more Skopjaners. Even, many of the stories we get here, it's actually happened before, these stories about nepotism in SDSM. They usually come from SDSM. It's not VMRO people doing investigative reporting. They're spying on themselves in good communist fashion.
Wow. Yeah, wow. Good. Well, we will, by the time we talk again next week and do the next podcast, this will be all firmed up a little bit more and we'll know where we're going. Well, I think I'm looking at the clock. I think it's time for our farmers picks. Yep. So, Cvetin, my farmers pick this week is a bit of a lead into it, so bear with me. I've long said that the Western elites are going to drop Zaev and most of the people around him once this whole name change business is accomplished. They still need him for a little bit longer, but we can expect to see that they will be distancing themselves from him going forward, along with, again, most of the people around him. Let's be honest. They view him as nothing more than a provincial yokel, a scam artist, and in all likelihood, they probably laugh at him. And again, this applies to most of the folks around him, with the exception, I'm going to bring up 2 exceptions, Nikola Dimitrov and Radmila Shekarinska. They view Nikola as polished, urbane, one of them. He speaks their language. He doesn't believe in anything other than himself, and he totally accepts their agenda. I think they've got plans for him. But with respect to Radmila, I think the jury's still out. And I recall, and this is something, good piece of information that our listeners probably don't know anything about, but years ago, 15 years ago, the Western elites viewed her as one who could be groomed. And we know that this is something that the embassies in Macedonia, the foreign embassies in Macedonia do, is they find people and they groom them. Our friend Sasha Uzanov from Australia has identified the Dutch embassy as being big with the Albanian crowd and picking out those folks and grooming them. But in 2007, here's the information. This is my farmer's pick. In 2007, Radmila Shekarenska received a scholarship worth tens of thousands of American dollars, and they sent her to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, where she received her a degree, a Grand Master of the Arts. And, that is just one example of the extent to which the Western elites will groom certain identified individuals in Macedonia. And it's funny, they all happen to be on the political left or from the Albanian parties. But I hate to pile on my country and the Western elites and in talking about the damage that's been done to our reputation, but they could change their ways, and if they're going to groom folks, they could at least identify folks on the right and allow them to advance with their own philosophy and critical thinking intact. That is my farmer's pick, Radmila Shekarenska in 2007, receiving a scholarship worth tens of thousands of American dollars to go to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts.
Yeah, money well spent. They actually can't groom people on the right because people on the right, if understood correctly, right-wing ideology, they would fight to limit the excesses of those in power, especially those in Brussels. So it's not going to work for them. we actually
excellent.
We're seeing a depressing development right now. Vumero is working with NDI to polish their messaging and
the Democrats.
Yeah, but
NDI, the National Democrat Institute.
Exactly, but then my first reaction was much like yours, like what? But then you think and you look at some of the stuff IRI people are saying, this current batch of IRI people, and you say, well, what's the difference at this point between the two of them? They're both DC creatures, while you have to go, elsewhere to look for real right-wing values, I guess.
True. Yeah. Hey, what's your farmer's?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a book by a Greek scholar from the States, actually, Haris Milonas. And the book is called The Politics of Nation Building. And it's an interesting bit. He actually explains, he goes into the forbidden territory for a Greek commentator and scholar. Many have gone, some have gone there, not few have returned. Many have faced problems and had to flee the country in some instances. Again, looking into how the Greek nation myth was created in the 19th century, early 20th century, and he's not afraid, not ashamed to acknowledge that there were Macedonians living in northern Greece or Aegean Macedonia, and that they were homogenized, as he would say, or forcibly Hellenized, as we would say, into a Greek identity. Many were expelled due to war and due to open hostility by the Greek government. Many were replaced by Greeks expelled in their own right from modern-day Turkey. But, he acknowledges to the Greek reader, which is the only reader who would need educating in this regard and schooling in this regard, that Macedonia as a region, the 50% which Greece captured as early as just a little over 100 years ago, in 1912, was not ethnically Greek, was not homogeneically Greek. It was even majority Macedonian, and it had a lot of Turks and Roma and Jews living in Solun, and yes, Greeks in the southern parts, but it was not homogeneously Greek. And saying something to a Greek now, especially at this high point for their triumph over Macedonia, would be anathema, and this is why I would like to just throw it out there and maybe somebody picks it up.
That's great. Yeah, make sure we get that in the show notes.
Definitely.
Well, great. We're running along. This has been a full podcast, as always. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
I think we covered ISIS, we covered Greeks, we covered everything under the sun. But let's leave something for for the next episode.
Absolutely. Great. All right. Oh, as always, great talking to you.
You too. Take care, buddy.